Happy hot summer here from Seattle, Washington, where we're clocking, I think, some like 85 degrees. All I know is all the air conditioners in Seattle are on for once. So we're probably going to have some kind of power surge, but it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's amazing. This city really lights up when the sun comes out, and you really just got to get out and enjoy it. And I'm so excited because I've got one of my favorite Seattle friends who's currently in Seattle right now because most of the time she is not. But I just got to share a little OG-ness here, right? She has the notion of having my very first podcast episode August 26, 2020, right? And we were in the middle of a pandemic. Actually, I think we met even in person, which was like super risky at the time. But we followed a really decent protocol. Nobody got sick, and but more importantly, we had this interview, and she has become my very first interview on my podcast. Speaking of my podcast, you can go there, and it's engagingvirtualmeetings.online. Again, engagingvirtualmeetings.online. And do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, right? Hit the subscribe button. We're releasing an episode every Wednesday at 11 o'clock, and we have enough content that we're loaded all the way into the end of 2024. So let me bring in my amazing guest. She's got a PhD. She's one of the most amazing consultants you've ever met, right? You're ever gonna meet, and I'd love to find out. This is 3 years later. I'm gonna ask similar questions, and I'm really curious from our guest here what has changed in those 3 years. Please welcome the one and only Kellee Franklin, PhD. Hi, Kellee. How are you doing?
I mean, it's hard to believe 3 years has already passed, but it has. And I'm just delighted to be here. Glad to be in Seattle, although the temperature, as you mentioned, is a little bit unseasonable for Seattle, but always delighted to be back in Seattle and just spending some time with you and your amazing network and community of professionals, and to talk about a topic that I know that you care about and that your network and our communities care about is, and you've done such a fantastic job over the last 3 years in connecting us all and making these communications and conversations so meaningful. So thank you for having me back. I'm delighted to be here today with you.
Oh, well, gosh, so thank you so much, Kellee. It's so great. I mean, I actually should have come in person. I should have come back to the hotel. We could have done it all over again. You know, it's so funny. We were like arranging things in the room to like make sure like the background actually looked right.
Yep.
And it was like early microphone days. So I would love to hear. Well, first off, Kellee, for a reminder, a few of my friends haven't met you yet. They should subscribe and listen to episode 1. But number one, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do, and then after that, I would love to hear like a short, what happened in your 3 years, right? I'm happy to share a few of the things that happened with me. I'd love to hear what happened with you. But let's start with an introduction, Kellee.
Yeah, quite simply, I'm a strategic innovation consultant, have been doing this work it's very hard for me to believe, John. I've been doing this for over 20 years. Spent 11 of those years with a great global technology and management consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton, primarily in the defense and intelligence space. Learned a lot, did that. It's what brought me out to Seattle. And then decided to launch my own independent consulting practice, which is what I've been doing since I left the big firm, and have had a chance to work with just a variety of great and wonderful organizations, from the White House all the way over to global humanitarian organizations like World Vision.
Wow.
Working on just we live in a very complex and complicated society, and these companies and organizations are finding themselves solving and resolving complex challenges. And I get the opportunity to dive in and help these amazing leaders look at those problems in new and interesting ways. And so I feel it a privilege and an honor to get the chance to partner with these different leaders. And so that's a little bit about what I do.
Yeah, so Booz Allen Hamilton has been one of my top 10 clients in the past. A shout out to my good friend Ed Cohen, who was the chief learning officer there many years ago. We're actually still connected. He's at Sprint Ray, a three-dimensional dental printing company in LA, who I've done some work with. Well, first off, I'd love to hear, like, what's an example of a strategic innovation advisor, right? Some people may not know. So I know there's some things you can't talk about, but I'd love to see. Do you have an example that you could come talk about where what you came in and consulted about really made a difference?
Well, what I recently, how I recently described myself was I'm kind of a Jacqueline of all trade, which
Right.
I'm not sure if that's the great explanation of that, but you and I share a mutual friend in Ed Cohen, because I learned a lot from Ed Cohen when I worked at Booz Allen, and he was a great transformational leader in leading our performance excellence program there at Booz Allen. What Ed was great at doing, which I think shows strategic innovation, was that he brought high performing consultants into the educational arm of Booz Allen, rather than just staffing it with trainers or educators. He brought people who were out in the organization, like myself, to go within the educational aspect of Booz Allen to educate other consultants on different aspects of the business. So to
Mm,
me, that's strategic innovation. When I was hired into Booz Allen, I was hired into an horizontally facing business line
mhm.
rather than a organizational vertical. And as you can imagine, that's really looking at organizations very differently than a business vertical, because you get a different vantage point and a different perspective. So let me give you like a modern day example. A recent client engagement, I was offered to come in and help them basically take their organizational system for where they currently are residing into a brand new organizational building. And the new building is not just a new building, but the way the building is designed is a totally new, open, active working environment. And they recognized that they needed somebody to help them think differently, not only in how they were going to help their employees move from their existing building into this new space, but how to help their employees think differently when they actually enter into the new space. And what that requires, as I know you know, is getting different parts of their organizational system together collectively to develop informational resources, educational resources, tools and resources, meaning technology resources, also motivational resources, and a whole bunch of collection of things that kind of put that engine together so that the car can drive. And
Mm.
what I've learned through the years is that not everybody thinks in those whole systems. And so
You
that's what
look
I
at
help
like they look at like individual chunks, right? But they never looking at like how all the pieces can actually fit together and work together, something like that.
all the pieces fit together. And so like our friend Ed Cohen is a very good whole systems thinker.
Yeah.
And I'm able to really look at things from a systems perspective. And I do think it helps leaders recognize that that we live and we work in webs of interdependencies.
Yeah.
And so I love the work that I do because it turns on a lot of light bulbs when you go in and you do this kind of work. And it's exciting for me to see.
Well, speaking of webs of interdependency, so maybe give us some highlights or lowlights in the last 3 years since I last saw you 3 years ago. What were some of the hallmark moments? Here, I'll give you. I'm trying to think a couple of mine. Obviously, I redesigned an entire business in a year, right? And it really, to me, the pandemic was actually a gift. I know for most people, it sucked, right? Like when I tell people in like public speaking, I'm like, how badly did the pandemic suck? Like people really felt that, and it wasn't like that for me. I actually changed my whole business, changed my whole life, and it was actually good for me. I designed this, right? I think you've seen this is the latest incarnation of my crazy studio. Normally I have up to 14 screens on, so that's something that I've done. And what else has happened with it too? It's like in my personal life, Kellee, it actually got better because I stopped traveling.
Yeah.
The stability in my life and like the regularity in my life, my personal quality of my life actually went up quite a bit. And it makes me, even now, like I have traveled 3 or 4 times this year, that reminds me how much energy is into tearing down and setting up stuff when you got to go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. and I love those perspectives. And I think for me, I continued to travel, so that opened up a broad range of different perspectives, I think, because I traveled and saw sort of this evolution of things being shut down. You mentioned you and I got together, at the kind of the outset of the pandemic. And then I've seen the way things have changed, not only for our clients, going through having to help move their organizations from on-site to full-time off-site, and now going through getting their employees come back to work. So it's been an interesting evolution. I think, John, what I notice over and over and over again with this conversation about work from home versus work from the office, and it keeps coming back, and it really is no surprise to me as somebody who has studied and believes in the human psychology aspect of humans. And you do a great job of that with the work you do with virtual meetings, is the cornerstone of creating meaning. And whether we're working virtually or whether we're bringing people together in person, is how do we design these conversations and these connections where we're creating meaning? And I think sometimes when we lose sight of that cornerstone is when we lose people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such an important thing. And it sort of was, even though I always have known that, it was illuminated for me during the pandemic. I think that I teach global graduate students.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they, much like our clients, had to pivot to, full-time virtual courses. And I would ask them at the beginning of every course to reflect on what they're most grateful for, what matters most to them about coming together collectively. And they would always talk about how grateful they were for the technology, but how they miss the opportunity to be together and to share the same space. And so I think, that's something for us to be thoughtful of as people who work with human beings and in human systems. And I try to always emphasize that when I talk to different clients, is that we're tribal by nature, John, right? So how do we create meaningful conversations and create meaning every time we have the opportunity to have connection with other people?
Well, you might like this piece, and I want to give a shout out to my very good friend, Diane Weigel, who's one of our karaoke friends who survived a bout with cancer, by the way. So shout out to you, Diane. And that kind of leads me to this piece here. Have you ever heard my theory of bandwidth?
I'm not sure I have.
So that the theory of bandwidth says, well, this is one of the ways that, as much as an advocate I am of virtual, is why in-person will never go away. So if you think about bandwidth, right, there's low bandwidth like text, right? Text doesn't take a lot of bandwidth, and there's audio that takes more bandwidth. Video takes more, like audio and video. And then eventually, like when you're in person, you get all these other bandwidth things that you don't normally get, right? Smell, taste, sometimes energy. Those are the things that you get in the in-person world. And so until the internet can replace all of those things, you'll never be able to replace that in-person experience, right? Because we as humans experience all those things, and sometimes there's those metaphysical factors or quantum physics type factors inside of that, and you can't replicate that. Some of those things you can do, like in virtual, really, I think we explored more than ever. How much can we do? And so we've had some really in-depth conversations on virtual, and they're not quite the same as the in-person. I also just watched there's a great series on Netflix right now called This Is Pop, and they talked about festivals, the abilities for humans to have a desire to come together and like listen to music and have a shared experience. There's still something hardwired in our DNA that we'll never walk away from it. I think watch concerts, right? The reemergence of concerts right now from the pandemic is like we're ready for that too. So I'd love to hear, I don't know, your views on that, or what you think at least of my current theory of bandwidth.
Well, I mean, I've shared with you a story kind of offline about a conversation I recently had with a young professional who was just getting started in her career,
Yeah.
and it was a virtual conversation. And I just said, how are things going? And she said, they're going great. And I said, how do you like working virtually? And she said, well, I have to be honest with you. She said, I'd prefer to be in the workplace. And I think to many people who've been in their career for some time, that comes as a surprise to them, because
Right.
there is an assumption from people who are my age and maybe a little older that the younger professionals are all hip with and want to be working from home. And that, quite honestly, John, has not been my experience. Much to my example of the global scholars and asking them those questions at the beginning of my time with them. Although
Yeah.
my graduate scholars range in age, for the most part, they're kind of in their mid-career to younger career professionals.
Mhm.
And, I reminded a gentleman I was on a plane ride with, who was roughly around the same age as I am. I said, you think about us in our early 20s, the workplace is where we connect, we build our networks,
Yes.
we
Yeah.
learn and we socialize. It's
Yeah.
kind of how we understand how work gets done.
Yeah.
And we get our sea legs, and more importantly, we're socializing, right? We're going after work and having those great conversations and social time together. And I said, so that's a big part of work life that I think we don't really pay attention to. And you don't get that. I mean, and you do a great job of creating a social experience on your virtual meetings. And I think there's something that happens that's unexplainable. Meg Wheatley does a great job in some of the research that she's done that talks about field theory, right? When people share the same space, there's something different about it that we can't, as you mentioned, we can't replicate in a virtual environment. Although we can do so many things to create connection, and you do a great job of it, and it's one of the reasons why I love the education that you're doing in your book and the conferences that you have, because I think it's so important, and we can do these types of things so much better than a lot of things that you and I run across, I'm sure.
Well, I think two things are happening there. One of the things is I did some work with DECA, right? DECA is like the high school organization, great business training for those, and many people I know have gone through it. And one of the unique hallmarks, like even in 2018, is they have a 5,000 person conference, and there's a, lights out, all right? Like 10 o'clock is pseudo curfew, you got to be in your room. But what do? They immediately logged on, right? And stayed connecting with each other. So connection was really one of the hallmarks, right? However it was, but it is a unique part, especially I think now through the pandemic. Again, I just came from Tony Robbins' Global Youth Leadership Summit, and my observation about the youth, these are all teenagers, probably 14 to 19, who just went 3 years of pandemic. They were really hungry for that connection. And so while like in DECA, they looked for a form of connection, like connection was already a theme that was there. And then I think now that the pandemic is here, that connection of being in person is really there. I mean, think about if we removed 3 years of your specific teenage years where you could not physically be with any of your friends. I mean, that would have those are 3 really defining years for me. Like I spent a lot of time with my skateboarding friends in a complete alternative culture, right? That we had all this language, we had our own language, we had our own culture, everything was there. And I'm trying to think of like, what if I didn't have any of that? It would radically change who I am. And so I'm very curious on your thoughts of like, what are you have already told me kind of what the youth are saying now. They're saying like, I really want that in-person connection. What do you think are some of the long-term impacts that might be from, this 3-year gap in
Yeah,
the
well,
young
even
person's
more
life?
importantly than that, and Yeah, even more importantly than that, something I think is important for your community to be aware of. There's something called the 3 R's to the learning brain. And I don't know if in your other podcast I've discussed this, but I'll briefly just sort of share them with you. So the 3 R's to the learning brain are, the first one is regulate, and the second one is relate, and the third one is reason. And the 3 R's to the learning brain are mostly attributable to child development. And I could make a very strong argument that those 3 R's to the learning brain could be applied to adult development and adult conversation. Let me explain that a little bit, John, so your community understands that. Anytime groups get together, whether in virtual conversation or in live conversations, we all enter a group situation at different stages of regulation. So let's say you're driving on I-5 to come downtown and you get stuck in traffic. I had a 3-block walk, right? So I'm feeling very relaxed. I have my Starbucks coffee. You're coming in very frustrated. People maybe had different situations and different scenarios when they enter the room, right? So we're at different levels of regulation. It's important for us as facilitators or our team leaders or whatever leading the conversation that we regulate that group. One of the best ways to do that is to either start that conversation with a question or a moment of just quiet silence to get everybody to sort of settle into that space. Because until everybody is regulated, you can't move to that next space, which is relate. Right? You can't move to that next space to relate. And ultimately, our goal, typically when we're in a meeting or in a learning type of environment, our ultimate goal is to get to reason, which is that learning space, right? Whether we're trying to get a team to move from point A to point B. So I think to your question, what's the future hold for virtual space?
Yeah.
I think we're getting better. I think we're getting better about these types of conversations. I think always I'm going to default to a better understanding of human psychology and how adults learn and adult development and these sorts of things like regulate, relate, and reason, and integrating those into how we have these types of conversations are so important. And I can tell you that I had Kathy Vizzacaro, who works for Ed Cohen at Sprint Ray, do courses. And she came in of like a 4-day course, and she was one of my guest speakers. She did a great job. And her reflection afterwards of her time with us was, you've created such an amazing community. And these were like 100 global scholars from, all over the world. She's like, how do you do that? And I think that's the highest compliment that professionals like yourself and like that me can get, when we can have somebody come into our meeting or our classroom and get that feeling, right? Because this is a virtual environment. And if somebody from the outside can come in and be like, what did you do to create something that felt warm and welcoming when this is something that just is so distant and kind of static or stale, right?
How do you answer though? You see, she asked you what do you do? What are some of the things that you do, Kellee?
Well, again, it's that I can't overemphasize the importance of that 3 R's, right? It's from day one, kind of setting the tone for, what are you grateful for? What did that for this particular group? right? So we set that, and then every day I would start off with reflective questions on the content from the day before. But I never jumped in on the morning and just started like content.
But a lot of people do that.
A lot of people do that, and that's just not my style. And a lot of it is because I have an understanding, my background psychology and organizational behavior and organizational psychology. So I have an understanding that, you need to settle people in and get them started. And I can tell you from my experience of doing it from a consulting perspective, I was running a big global engagement for actually a global technology consulting firm. And it was a gathering of their product leaders, so technology people, right? Bringing them all together for a global gathering in Chicago. And I said to their executive, I said, my suggestion to you to kick things off is to start it off with a question. And she was very resistant. She's like, these are technology people. They're not going to be interested in like reflecting on a question. I said, trust me. I said, these are all technology people, but they're in the health space. I said, it just might surprise you. And I didn't get into the whole regulate. I didn't want to go into that. I
Field
just said,
theory, right? Yeah.
I said, just trust me. And so she did. And we put on a PowerPoint slide the question, gave them a few minutes to silently reflect. Then we opened it up where they could share with others.
Yep.
And then we invited them to share with the group. And you would be amazed at their reflections were about, my dad died of cancer when I was 15, and I was motivated to get into the healthcare space
Wow.
and they made all these connections. They were relating to each other. It transformed the rest of the 3 days. So this is the whole thing around meaning, John, kind of bringing it full circle to the start of our conversation, right?
Yeah.
This 3 R's, if we can be very thoughtful about the questions that we're designing into, whether we're meeting face-to-face or whether we're meeting virtually, are fundamentally going to change the experience that somebody has, because it's going to be more meaningful to the conversations that you're ending up having.
What I love about this is that it's like the edict in race car driving, right? You got to go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is to not jump in the content and ask a question. Also, the other concept I have here, at least my reflection of your 3 R's is rapport. You align the group, right? You got to get them all together in this group experience before you take them somewhere. Because otherwise everyone is like, it's like, herding intelligent cats. Everyone's already off in their own interpretation of that. So I love this going slow to go fast. And like, I just did this recently. I had a presentation. It was called Engaging Not Virtual Meetings, Kellee. Because I interviewed the convener of the conference, Ann Harper. It was the National Association of Catering and Events, and she goes, well, what about this virtual thing? She goes, oh, my group is really burned out, right? Because they're caterers, right? They're food and they're people, and it's in person. And I'm like, I get it. Okay. So I said, let me invent this session called Engaging Not Virtual Meetings. And what was really important about it is that engagement is not just in virtual meetings, right? We're still having the same challenge we did pre-pandemic, that a lot of in-person meetings are not engaging. But you immediately change the context of your meeting by asking a question, letting people talk, and then letting people discuss or share. That already says that I'm not going to talk to you for 45 minutes straight, right? This is about a conversation. And I love what you said about it here too, that this becomes a community. That's something that I was also known for. Like in one I was virtual MC, and we went so far as that we created a whole identity for the group, and the group was called Virtual Land. That's what I called them. All the virtual attendees in a hybrid were called Virtual Land, and they grabbed onto the identity so strong. They said, is there a way we could stay together? That I created a Facebook group for them, and I put the link out and said, here, join if you want. 200 of them joined in under 24 hours. So there is some magic in the community,
Amazing.
right?
Yeah.
You can do it in both places, obviously, but yeah, we're talking about the structure of this field theory and the structure of these three R's. I think it's something that people really need to take about, because the opening question in mine was, what is engaging?
Yeah.
Right. And so going back to you, Kellee, like, how could you answer that question? Right. You might go back to the three R's, but what is engaging for you?
I think it's important that I'll go back to a recent conversation that I had with someone, again, that individual that's young professional.
Yeah.
Right? I was meeting with her about something totally related to the project that I was helping to support. But I said to her, again, virtual conversation, I said to her, I'm curious, what are you passionate about doing? What do you want to work on? And so I think oftentimes we're so busy with making sure people hear what we have to say, John. Does that make sense? That we're not inviting the conversation.
About you, right? It's not about me, right? In the end, like a lot of the theory that I have too, all right, is this meeting is not engaging because I'm here.
Yeah.
This meeting is engaging because you're here, Kellee.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that it's how do we get it where we're inviting? So again, simply, as I've shared with you, I'm working on this client engagement.
Yeah.
I try to design the weekly status meetings so that 95+% of the conversation is around the table, everybody else is talking, and I'm just sort of navigating that and facilitating that. To me, that is engaging, because it's and the time goes by. It's like an hour-long meeting. It goes by very fast. People are having fun. It's joyful, and we're getting work done.
Yeah.
But it's as if time just elapses, right? That to me is what engaging is. There are times, of course, when I have to give information out, but oftentimes is the meeting the place we have to do that? There are other formats we can give information out. I think it's, let's really be thoughtful and intentional and mindful about, just as we would if we're bringing people together in a in-person space. And I emphasize this with my graduate scholars. Design should show up in everything, including meetings. Right?
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say is like, and a lot of the research that we have goes along with this. You don't talk, 95% of the time, and the value you create is in the design and the agenda of that meeting. And it all happens, before and then your debrief after to figure out what to do with the group next. So that's where a lot of your value is. And I think a lot of speakers miss that.
Yes.
They miss the fact that, right, the real content is the room, right? Your job is to get that content out.
100% agree. And, I think just being very thoughtful about that. And, again, it kind of goes back to the meaning piece, right? Meaning and meaningful. I hope that every time somebody walks away from, a meeting, that they feel like they were seen and they were heard.
I could share this. I got a comment and saying, I felt seen even though I was only chatting. Right. Yeah. So she said that she couldn't turn her camera on. She was in a situation. That's fine. And I also got the other comment recently saying, finally, a meeting that could not be an email. Right.
I mean, that's such a huge compliment. Right. And I hope you share the same philosophy with me. Life happens so fast, and we get such few opportunities to have these moments, these human moments, as a psychiatrist has written about, calls them these human moments. And I just want these to be more precious than we allow them to be, right? And I think if we design these conversations more with that as sort of the foundational roots of them, I think we would be blessed, not only with the people that we engage with, but we ourselves would be blessed. And I hope with the pandemic, John,
Yes.
that is a lesson that we all learned. I'm not so sure that maybe everyone's gotten the memo on that. When I drive and through parking lots in some way, and I get honked when I'm driving and trying to be patient to let pedestrians cross the street, and someone honks the horn. But I think we do. We try to do our part to demonstrate that these human moments are so fleeting and go so fast.
Yeah.
And how important and precious they are. And you never know what kind of imprint you're having on another human being. And, so.
I want to give a shout out to the one and only Edward Scannell. Edward Scannell wrote the big book of team building games. He paved the path for me. He was at Wiley, one of the top selling team building books. He's also a National Speaking Association member and in the meetings industry. Hi, Ed. And the second one is just to kind of complete this, Kellee, I was recently asked to produce somebody's hybrid celebration of life.
Mm.
So Bob Pike is a longtime trainer, and he entered hospice about a week and a half ago. And he asked me to produce his celebration of life. And luckily, because he was in hospice, he could attend his own celebration of life, right? That's the radical idea, is like he was there.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I just want to be able to hear these things, right? Before
Wow.
I go. I'm probably not going to hear this many good things in a day, right? For a long time. So it was really great. And if you follow my YouTube channel, go ahead and check that out, because we were allowed to video it, and we have the parts in there. It's amazing. It's a who's who, like, of Hall of Fame of speakers, right? Do you remember the name Ken Blanchard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, 1 minute manager. Yeah. Ken Blanchard gives the opening prayer, because him and Bob Pike had worked together. And so just getting back to your last part that says, you never know what impact your life had, right? And all it has to do is have an impact on one person.
Oh, yeah. So can I share a story that I love to pass along, because it has a lot of meaning for me. So I lost my dad when I was 22, and he did very similar work to the work that I do in the world. And he'd spent many years in the U.S. federal government before ending his career at the University of Maryland. And because he had done so many years in the federal government, at his memorial service, speaking of memorial services, we had a number of were scheduled to speak at his service. And a few days before his memorial service, a woman approached my mother and asked if she could speak as well. And of course, my mom was like, "We'd be delighted to have you speak." And the day of the service, the church overflowed with people, because my dad was a very, mentor and guide for so many people. And the individuals got up and spoke, and then this woman was the last person to speak, and she was clearly the only non-polished, non-professional speaker of the group. And she got up in front of this, full capacity church, and she said, every morning, Mr. Franklin would spend some time with me and sit down with me and have a cup of coffee and ask me how I was doing and how my kids were doing. And she said, I'll never forget him. And she was the janitor in his building. Wow. And I have to tell you, as a 22-year-old who was coming 10 days after I had graduated from college, that's the only speech I remember from that memorial service. And it was still to this day, John, probably the most transformational learning moment of my life, because I was sort of like, this is it. This is what this whole thing is all about. And it really has shaped the way I have led and guided again, from organizations from the White House to the Pentagon to global humanitarian organizations, because I know how important it is that people feel seen and people feel heard. And it doesn't matter if you're a janitor in a building or you're a CEO. I hear that over and over again from people, that taking the time to attend to and be intentional about the types of environments and conversations we're having are so meaningful. And oh, by the way, all those awards and accolades that we strive so hard for, I learned from my dad's experience that those go in boxes, and I don't mean to diminish those because they are important to us, but it's those human relationships that are our legacy. And so whether we're connecting people virtually or we're doing it in person, we can create a better world just in making these things more meaningful. And John, you're just a great example in the work you do every day by reaching out and creating community. And I'm just honored to just be able to be in your network. And I appreciate the invitation today to share some space with you.
Oh, and just reconnect. You remind me of two great quotes, right, that are happening right now. Number one, authenticity trumps perfection. Right? The authenticity of that janitor, it doesn't matter. We'll floor all the professional speakers in the house because, right, no one had more heart than her that day. And the second one is that my favorite speaker quote of the year is "Goosebumps don't lie." Mm. If you get goosebumps while you're hearing any part of this conversation, pay attention to that. It's saying something to you at a deep cellular emotional level, saying that's probably the right thing to do. That's probably maybe something you need to do, right? Whatever it is, pay attention to that. I think maybe Kellee, as a psychologist, or in that field of psychology, is that our emotions are our guidance systems for us as humans. Like if we love or hate something, that pretty much tells us to do a lot more of that or stop doing that. It sounds easy, but we try and ignore it all the time. Kellee, let's just try and let's see if you can do one last thing. If somebody was listening to this interview and you only wanted them to remember one thing, just like that speech that janitor gave, what do you think your one thing is today?
I think it's you never underestimate. And I'm going to kind of borrow from great philosopher. You never underestimate just how your kindness and generosity can change the life of another human being. It really can. I mean, I think back on my life. And I was fortunate at Booz Allen to work for two extraordinary leaders. Mm-hmm. One was a senior intelligence officer from the Air Force, and the other one had retired from the Central Intelligence Agency. So these are two very decorated professionals who came from pretty hardened, types of organizations. But some of the most generous and loving human beings who recognize the importance of mentoring and guiding and being kind. And I think that the world would benefit greatly for more of that compassion and generosity. And I think that your community is full of those types of people, and we just need to spread that a little bit more.
And yeah, just do it a little more. Thank you so much, Kellee. Thanks for investing a little bit of your time here today and sharing. You just, as usual, dropping massive bombs of wisdom. And I really hope, I was just talking with another leader today. If we could just inspire people to do one thing different from the time that we said something, that to me makes a great day. So Kellee, thank you again, and I look forward. Let's not wait 3 years. Maybe you'll just like on an annual basis in August 22nd. It's going to be Kellee Franklin Day here on the podcast.
Always good to see you, John. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon. Okay.
Thank you, Kellee. So Kellee, yes, thank you so much. That was Kellee Franklin, PhD, here on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. Super deep conversation. Remember those 3 R's, right? Get those out there. Let me see if I can do them. Wait, regulate, relate, and oh, come on, where's my notes? I just moved them. Wait, I got them here. Oh yeah, reason. I got it. Regulate, relate, and reason. Think about that. And then the last part is, if you didn't catch it, do something good in this world, right? The small things too are really the key things. Do something small in this world and make an impact. With that, I'm just going to see if you can make this impact here. If you want more of this, go to engagingvirtualmeetings.online and hit the subscribe button. I'd love to see you on this podcast. You're going to get a new episode every Wednesday, giving you more great stuff here in the engaging space. All right. Well, my name is John Chen, and this has been another Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. If you want to be a guest, click the link at the bottom there and select interview, and you too might be the next guest here on Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. We'll see you next time.
So we start people and people, show me a heart. Ready for